My name is Harper, and am 32 years old. I'm standing in a lawyer's office in Manhattan, staring at the contract in front of me. $8.5 million. That's what my AgTech startup just sold for. The pen feels heavy in my hand as I sign my name on the final page. My advisor Margot squeezes my shoulder, and my mentor Clayton raises his coffee cup in a quiet toast. But there's an empty chair at this table. Actually, there are 4 empty chairs. My parents aren't here. My sister isn't here. My brother isn't here. 3 years ago, at a family dinner, my father looked me dead in the eye and called me their disappointment daughter. My phone buzzes. A text from my mother. We need to talk about your inheritance. I stare at those words, and something cold settles in my chest. They wanted to talk now? After everything they'd done? Before we dive into this story, I want to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you're ready to hear how I went from family reject to 8-figure exit, go ahead and smash that like button and hit subscribe. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for what happens next, because this journey is about to get real. I grew up in Connecticut in one of those houses where everything looked perfect from the outside. My father, Gerald, was a successful corporate lawyer who wore tailored suits and spoke in courtroom tones even at the breakfast table. My mother, Patricia, was a respected cardiologist at Yale New Haven Hospital, the kind of woman who kept her white coat starched and her reputation spotless. Then there was my older sister, Natalie, who seemed to have been born knowing exactly what our parents wanted. She graduated top of her class from Harvard Medical School, got engaged to another lawyer from a good family, and had already been promoted to head of cardiology at 29. My younger brother Preston was being groomed to take over my father's firm, attending networking events since he was 16 and talking about legacy like it was oxygen. And then there was me, the middle child, the one who didn't quite fit. I loved science, but not the kind my mother practiced. I loved problem solving, but not the kind my father billed by the hour. When I told them I wanted to study agricultural science at Cornell, my mother actually laughed. Not a mean laugh, but the kind that said she thought I was joking. My father put down his newspaper and said, "You want to study dirt?" I explained that it was about sustainable food systems, about feeding growing populations, about climate resilience. He went back to his newspaper. "That tells me everything I need to know about your judgment." I went to Cornell anyway. I paid for half of it myself through scholarships and campus jobs. I spent 4 years learning about soil composition, crop genetics, irrigation systems, and emerging technologies. I spent summers at experimental farms instead of country clubs. I came home with dirt under my fingernails, and ideas that made my eyes light up. My family treated those years like I was serving time rather than earning a degree. At every holiday gathering, someone would ask what I was doing with my life, and before I could answer, my mother would wave her hand dismissively and change the subject. Natalie would swoop in with updates about her residency or her engagement. Preston would talk about the cases he was learning, and I would sit there, silent, watching my accomplishments dissolve like they'd never existed. The real breaking point came at a family dinner 3 months after I graduated. We were at my parents' house, and the dining room table was set with the good china because Natalie had an announcement. She stood up with her wine glass and told everyone she'd just been promoted to head of cardiology at 31, the youngest in the hospital's history. Everyone applauded. My father stood and hugged her. My mother actually had tears in her eyes. I clapped too, genuinely happy for my sister despite everything. Then Natalie looked at me and said, "Harper, what about you? Any updates?" I took a breath and told them about my idea. I'd spent the last 3 months researching vertical farming technology and AI-driven crop management systems. I wanted to start a company that would help small and mid-sized farms increase yields while reducing water usage and chemical inputs. I'd already built a rough prototype of an IoT sensor system that could monitor soil health in real time. I had spreadsheets full of market research. I had a business plan. I thought maybe, finally, they'd see that I was serious, that I had something valuable to offer the world. My father stared at me for a long moment. Then he started laughing. Not a chuckle, but a full, genuine laugh. "You want to be a farmer? That's your big plan? 4 years at Cornell for this?" My mother set down her fork and looked at me with something close to pity. "Where did we go wrong with you, Harper? We gave you every opportunity, every advantage, and this is what you choose?" Natalie leaned back in her chair, examining her nails. "At least Preston and I are making the family proud." Preston smirked into his water glass. My father shook his head and said, "If you're determined to embarrass yourself, that's your choice. But don't expect us to fund this fantasy. And when you fail, don't come crawling back here expecting us to fix it. I left that dinner with my hands shaking, and my vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall until I was in my car. I drove back to my tiny apartment in New Haven, and sat in the dark for hours. But somewhere around midnight, I made a decision. I would do this. Not to prove them wrong, though that was part of it, but because I genuinely believed in the mission, because I'd seen the data about food insecurity and climate change, because I knew technology could be a bridge between traditional farming wisdom and future sustainability. I had $12,000 in savings. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and it would have to be enough. I moved to Brooklyn 3 weeks later. The apartment was barely 400 square feet, and the radiator clanked so loudly, I thought it might explode every night. But rent was $800 a month, and it had internet. I took 3 part-time jobs. I tutored high school students in biology on weeknights. I worked weekend shifts at a coffee shop in Park Slope. I did freelance data analysis for agricultural research firms whenever I could find contracts. Between all of that, I coded and soldered and tested and rebuilt my prototype sensor system. 6 months in, I met Silas at a tech meetup in Bushwick. He was an agricultural engineer who'd worked for a big agribusiness company before quitting because he said he was tired of making rich corporations richer. We got coffee after the meetup and talked for 3 hours about precision agriculture and the future of food systems. He saw my prototype and his eyes lit up. This could actually work, he said. We shook hands and became partners. He'd handle the hardware engineering. I'd handle the software and business development. We'd split equity 60-40, with me holding the larger share since it was my concept and I'd already invested months of work. For 6 months, we worked like people possessed. Silas had a workshop in Queens where we'd meet after our day jobs and build until 2 or 3 in the morning. We developed an IoT sensor system that could measure soil moisture, nutrient levels, pH balance, and microbial activity. The data would feed into a cloud-based AI that would give farmers specific recommendations for irrigation, fertilization, and planting schedules. It wasn't revolutionary on its own, but the combination of affordability, ease of use, and accuracy could genuinely help small farms compete with industrial agriculture. We found our first potential investor through a contact of Silas. His name was Mr. Lawson, a wealthy farmer from Pennsylvania. Wad made his money in organic produce and was looking to invest in agricultural innovation. He came to Brooklyn, sat in Silas' cramped workshop, and watched our demonstration. 3 days later, he transferred $50,000 into our business account. I cried when I saw that number. It was the first time anyone had believed in this vision enough to put real money behind it. We used the money to refine the prototype, file for preliminary patents, and build out a beta version we could actually test. We lined up 3 small farms in upstate New York who agreed to let us install our system for free in exchange for feedback. Everything was coming together. Silas and I worked 16-hour days. We barely slept. But I was happier than I'd been in years, because I was building something that mattered. Then Silas disappeared. He stopped answering my calls and texts. He didn't show up to the workshop for 2 weeks. I went to his apartment and his roommate said he'd gone to visit family in Oregon. I felt uneasy but tried to tell myself it was just stress or burnout. We'd both been pushing too hard. But when I went to the workshop to keep working, I found files missing. Blueprints we'd printed. USB drives with our source code. The backup hard drive we kept locked in a cabinet was gone. I felt sick. I called Silas 20 times. Finally, he answered. His voice was flat and distant. I'm sorry, Harper. I got an offer I couldn't refuse. A company called TerraGrow Solutions had reached out to him, he explained. They were developing a similar product, and they wanted his expertise. They'd paid him $80,000 for our blueprints, our code, everything we'd built together. He said he needed the money. He said I was too idealistic for this business. He said I'd understand someday. I didn't understand. I felt like my chest had been cracked open. This was my idea, my vision, my months of work before Head ever joined, and Head just sold it like it meant nothing. I contacted a lawyer to explore my options. The consultation alone cost $1,500. The lawyer told me that without a formal partnership agreement beyond our handshake and some email exchanges, and without the resources to fight a prolonged legal battle, I was essentially powerless. TerraGrow Solutions filed a patent application for a system nearly identical to ours within days. They had corporate lawyers and deep pockets. I had rage and $12,000 in debt. Mr. Lawson found out what happened. He called me and said he was pulling his investment. He wanted his $50,000 back, plus interest. I tried to explain that I'd already spent most of it on materials and development. He didn't care. He said I'd shown poor judgment in choosing a partner, and that reflected badly on my business acumen. I sold my car. I sold the few pieces of jewelry I owned. I borrowed money from 2 friends who believed in me. I scraped together $47,000 and sent it to him. I still owed him $3,000, and my savings account had $62 in it. I thought about calling my father. He was a lawyer. Maybe he could at least give me advice, even if he wouldn't help financially. I sat with my phone in my hand for 20 minutes before I finally dialed. He answered on the 4th ring. I explained what had happened. There was a long silence. Then he said, "You made your bed, Harper. Now lie in it. This is what happens when you chase fantasies instead of building a real career." My mother got on the line. Her voice was softer, but the message was the same. "Come home. Get a real job. We can find you a position at the hospital in administration. Something stable. Something respectable." I hung up without saying goodbye. That night, I sat on the floor of my apartment and cried harder than I ever had in my adult life. I felt like a failure. Like maybe they were right. Maybe I was a disappointment. Maybe I'd wasted years and destroyed my financial future for nothing. I thought about giving up. About going home and accepting whatever job they found for me, and spending the rest of my life wondering what could have been. But then I looked at the corkboard above my desk. There was a photo I'd taped there months ago. A picture I'd found in a National Geographic article about food insecurity. It showed children in a rural village, skinny and hungry, standing in a field that should have been producing crops but was barren from drought and poor soil management. That photo was why I'd started this. Not for my family's approval. Not even for the money, though that would have been nice, but because food security mattered, because farmers deserved better tools, because the world needed solutions, not excuses. I wiped my face. I stood up, and I decided I wasn't done yet. I'd just have to learn to play the game differently. I spent 2 weeks doing nothing but research. I read everything I could find about intellectual property law, about how to protect innovations, about what had gone wrong with Silas, and how to avoid it in the future. I learned that my first mistake was trusting too easily. My second was not documenting everything properly. My third was thinking a handshake, and good intentions were enough. I wouldn't make those mistakes again. I also realized I needed to pivot. TerraGrow had my original sensor design, or at least Silas' version of it. Fighting them head-on would be expensive and futile. But technology moves fast. What if I went in a different direction? Instead of just monitoring soil, what if I built a system that could predict crop yields and pest problems before they happened? I started teaching myself machine learning. I took free online courses from MIT and Stanford. I downloaded agricultural datasets from government databases. I spent 18 hours a day coding and testing algorithms. My coffee shop shifts were the only time I left my apartment. I was exhausted and broke and living on ramen and peanut butter, but I was building something new, something better. 3 months into this solo rebuild, I attended a tech conference in Boston. I'd scraped together money for a bus ticket and planned to sleep in the station, but the conference had free food and I needed to network. During a panel on agricultural innovation, I asked a question about data privacy concerns for farmers. After the panel, a woman approached me. Her name was Margot, and she'd been the chief technology officer at a seed-to-sale tracking startup that had been acquired 2 years earlier. She'd made enough money to retire at 43, but she was bored. She asked me what I was working on. I told her everything. About Silas, about my family, about my current project. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, "I like you. You've got grit. How would you feel about having an advisor?" Margot became my lifeline. She didn't invest money, but she gave me something more valuable. She taught me how to pitch, how to negotiate, how to spot red flags in potential partners. She introduced me to her network of investors and entrepreneurs. She reviewed my code and my business plans and told me, without sugarcoating, what was good and what needed work. She also warned me. "The tech world is brutal," she said over coffee one morning. "Trust no one completely. Not your co-founders, not your investors, not even your friends. Protect yourself first." I nodded, but part of me still wanted to believe that wasn't necessary. I'd learn how wrong I was soon enough. With Margot's guidance, I refined my new product. I called it FarmSense AI. It used satellite imagery, weather data, soil sensor inputs, and machine learning to predict crop yields. identify potential pest infestations, and recommend interventions before problems became catastrophic. I beta tested it with 10 small farms in upstate New York, offering it for free in exchange for feedback. The results were remarkable. Farmers reported an average 23% increase in yields and a 40% reduction in wasted inputs like water and pesticides. One farmer told me ED saved his business. Another said she could finally afford to send her daughter to college. A local newspaper ran a story about me. Young innovator brings AI to small farms. It was a small article, buried on page 6, but it was something. My family saw it. I knew because my mother texted me a link with no comment. Natalie sent a message that said, "Don't let it get to your head. You're still nobody." I didn't respond. I focused on the work, because that was what mattered. The newspaper story led to my first paying customer. A large organic farm in Iowa reached out and said they wanted to license FarmSense AI for their entire operation. The contract was worth $30,000. I read it 5 times to make sure it was real. Then I signed it, and for the first time in 2 years, I could pay myself a salary. It wasn't much, just enough to cover rent and groceries and maybe an occasional coffee that wasn't homemade. But it felt like victory. Small, fragile, but real. Margot took me out to dinner to celebrate. "You're not done yet," she said. "This is just the beginning. You've proven the concept. Now you need to scale. And that means raising real money." I nodded, my stomach churning with excitement and terror, because I knew what came next. I had to pitch to venture capitalists. I had to stand in front of rooms full of people who would judge me, question me, and decide whether I was worth betting on. And given my track record with my own family, I wasn't sure I could handle more rejection, but I had to try. Margot convinced me to apply to pitch at TechCrunch Disrupt, one of the biggest startup conferences in the country. I didn't think I'd get accepted, but I filled out the application anyway. 6 weeks later, I got an email. I was in. I had 7 minutes on stage in front of over 1,000 people, including some of the most influential investors in Silicon Valley. I practiced my pitch 200 times. I timed every word. I anticipated every possible question. The night before, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my hotel room staring at my slides and wondering if I was about to humiliate myself on a national stage. But when I walked out there, something shifted. The lights were bright and the audience was intimidating, but I knew my material inside and out. I talked about food insecurity and climate change. I talked about how small farms were disappearing because they couldn't compete with industrial agriculture. I talked about how FarmSense AI could level the playing field. I showed real data from my beta tests. I showed testimonials from farmers. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. Then the room erupted in applause. People stood up. I couldn't believe it. I walked off stage shaking. Within an hour, 15 investors had requested meetings. Over the next 3 days, I took pitch after pitch. Some were interested, some were skeptical. But one firm, led by a partner Margot had introduced me to months earlier, made an offer. They wanted to lead a seed round of $1.2 million. I nearly fainted. Margot negotiated the terms. I kept 20% equity after dilution, which she said was good for a first-time founder. We closed the round 6 weeks later. I hired a team. 5 engineers who believed in the mission, 2 salespeople who could talk to farmers in their language. We rented a small office in Brooklyn, with exposed brick and too much sunlight, and a coffee maker that barely worked. It felt like a dream. TechCrunch published an article, "AgTech Wonderkind Revolutionizes Farming with AI." My phone blew up. Old acquaintances congratulated me. Strangers emailed asking for advice. And then my father called. It was the first time I'd heard his voice in nearly 2 years. He said he'd seen the article. He said it was impressive. Then he said, "But let's see if you can sustain it. Most startups fail within 3 years. Don't spend all that money foolishly." There was no apology. No acknowledgement of how he'd treated me. Just a reminder that he still didn't fully believe in me. I thanked him for calling and hung up. My mother texted the same day. "We're proud of you, but don't let success make you reckless." I didn't respond. 2 months into our growth phase, my sister Natalie showed up at my office. I was shocked to see her. She hugged me and said she'd been following my journey and wanted to reconnect. She said she was sorry for how distant the family had been. She wanted a tour of the office. She wanted to see the technology. Part of me was skeptical, but a bigger part of me was desperate to believe that maybe, finally, my family was coming around. So I showed her everything. I walked her through our software. I explained our algorithms. I showed her our client list and our revenue projections. She asked smart questions. She seemed genuinely interested. When she left, she hugged me again and said, "I'm really proud of you, Harper. Let's not be strangers anymore." 3 weeks later, I found out what she'd really been doing. One of my salespeople forwarded me an article from an industry newsletter. TerraGrow Solutions had just launched a new product. It was nearly identical to FarmSense AI. Same features, same interface, even some of the same marketing language ID used. And their pricing was 30% lower than ours. The article mentioned that TerraGrow had received a significant investment from a private backer to accelerate development. I did some digging. The private backer was a holding company. After more digging, I traced it back. Natalie was one of the investors. I called her immediately. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. She answered cheerfully. "Harper, what's up?" I asked her if she'd invested in TerraGrow. There was a pause. Then she said, "Oh, that. Yes, it's just business, Harper. You're in the big leagues now. You can't be so emotional about competition." I asked her how she could betray me like that, after Eid trusted her. She laughed. "Betray you? In protecting the family's real legacy. Your little experiment, isn't it? Preston and I have been talking, and we agree that you're in over your head. This is a favor, really. When you fail, which you will, you'll thank us for building a safety net." I hung up on her. The damage was immediate. 3 of our biggest clients switched to TerraGrow because of the lower price. Our revenue dropped 45% in a single month. Team morale collapsed. 2 of my engineers quit, saying they didn't want to work for a sinking ship. I stopped taking a salary to preserve runway. I worked 20-hour days trying to fix the bleeding. But it felt like trying to bail out a sinking boat with a teaspoon. Margot pulled me aside one afternoon. Her face was grim. "Harper, we need to talk about contingency plans. If we can't turn this around in the next quarter, we might need to shut down. Or sell the company for whatever we can get." I nodded numbly. I felt like I was drowning. That night, I sat alone in the empty office. It was past midnight. The city was quiet outside the windows. I thought about calling my parents, about admitting they were right, about giving up and going home, but I couldn't. I physically could not make myself do it, because that would mean Natalie won. That would mean my father's smug prediction came true. That would mean every insult, every dismissal, every moment that made me feel small was justified. I put my head down on my desk and closed my eyes, and then I made a decision. If I was going down, I was going down fighting. I called an emergency team meeting the next morning. I told them the truth. We were in trouble, but I had a plan. Instead of competing directly with TerraGrow on price, we'd pivot our focus. We'd target a niche market they were ignoring. Organic farms and sustainability-focused clients who cared more about environmental impact than bottom line. We'd partner with certification organizations and nonprofits. We'd position FarmSense not just as a tool, but as a movement. Some of the team looked skeptical, but my lead engineer, a woman named Iris, said, "I'm in. Let's do it." The rest followed. We also applied for a USDA grant program aimed at supporting agricultural innovation. It was a long shot, but we qualified. I spent 3 weeks writing the application, barely sleeping. Margot reviewed every word. When we submitted it, I felt like I'd just handed in a final exam that would determine my entire future. 2 months later, we got the news. We'd been awarded a $200,000 grant. It wasn't enough to solve everything, but it bought us time. I also started building community. I hosted free webinars for farmers about sustainable practices. I wrote blog posts about the intersection of technology and traditional farming wisdom. I positioned myself as an educator, not just a vendor. It was exhausting, but it worked. Slowly, farmers started reaching out. Not the big commercial operations, but family farms. People who cared about the land and wanted to do right by it. Our customer base grew. Not explosively, but steadily. Then, something unexpected happened. I gave a TED Talk. A friend of Margot's worked for the organization and thought my story would resonate. I almost said no because public speaking terrified me. But Margot pushed. "You need to own your narrative," she said. So I stood on that red circle and told my story. I talked about being called a disappointment. I talked about betrayal and failure. I talked about why feeding the world mattered more than family approval. The talk was called Feeding the Future: How AI Can Save Small Farms. It went viral. 2 million views in 2 weeks. My inbox exploded with inquiries. We signed 500 new clients in a month. Revenue climbed to $400,000 monthly. I hired back the team members who'd left, plus 10 more. We opened a second office in San Francisco. My brother Preston called me. I hadn't heard from him since that awful family dinner years ago. He said he'd watched my TED Talk. He said he was impressed. He wanted to invest $500,000 in exchange for 25% equity. I almost laughed. I told him no. We didn't need his money anymore, and even if we did, I wouldn't take it. Not from someone who'd stood by silently while our parents tore me apart. He got angry. He said I was being petty. He said family should support family. I said, "You're right. Too bad you didn't remember that 3 years ago." I hung up. 2 weeks later, strange things started happening. Anonymous posts appeared on startup forums questioning my credentials. Someone claimed I'd cheated in college. Another post suggested FarmSense was stealing data from farmers and selling it to agribusiness corporations. The posts were obviously false, but they were persistent and well-written. They started showing up on Reddit, on Twitter, on LinkedIn. I hired a reputation management firm to combat it, but the damage was subtle and creeping. Potential clients would mention they'd heard concerns. Investors would ask pointed questions during due diligence. I traced the posts back as best I could. They came from different accounts, but the writing style was similar. And one account had slipped up and posted a photo that included metadata showing a location in Connecticut, near where Preston lived. He was trying to destroy me from the shadows because I'd refused his money. I felt sick. This wasn't just business competition. This was personal vendetta. This was my own brother trying to sabotage me because his ego couldn't handle me succeeding without him. Around the same time, I'd hired a chief financial officer named Felix. He came with stellar credentials: 15 years at major tech companies, an MBA from Wharton, recommendations from people I trusted. He was supposed to help us scale financially, manage our books, prepare us for Series A fundraising. I gave him access to our bank accounts and financial systems, because that was his job. For 3 months, everything seemed fine. Then our accountant called me. There were irregularities in the books, transfers that didn't match invoices, expenses that seemed inflated. I dug into it with our accountant. We found that Felix had been transferring money into a side account. 18,000 here, 23,000 there. Over 3 months, had siphoned off $180,000. When I confronted him, he didn't even seem ashamed. He said they were consulting fees for additional work had done. I told him there was no record of any additional work or approval for consulting fees. He shrugged and said, "You're too naive, Harper. This is standard in business. Everyone takes a cut. You just don't know how things work yet." I fired him immediately and reported him to the police. Our bank froze the accounts during the investigation, which meant we couldn't pay our employees. For 2 months, my team worked without paychecks, trusting that I'd make it right. Some stayed. 5 left, including one of our best engineers who said he couldn't afford to work for free anymore. I couldn't blame him. I couldn't pay rent on my own apartment. I moved back in with a friend who let me sleep on her couch. I felt like I was back where I'd started. Broke, exhausted, betrayed. I called home one last time. I was desperate. Maybe they'd help now. Maybe seeing how hard I'd worked, how close I'd come, would soften them. My father answered. I explained what had happened with Felix. I explained that I just needed a short-term bridge loan to keep the company alive while we recovered the stolen money. There was a long pause. Then he said, "This is proof you're not cut out for leadership, Harper. You're too trusting, too emotional. These aren't weaknesses you can fix." My mother got on the line. "Sell the company while you still can. Come home. You've proven you can work hard. Now prove you can make smart decisions." Neither of them offered to help. I hung up and sat in the dark and felt something inside me break. Not my will, but my hope that they'd ever change, that they'd ever see me as anything other than a disappointment. That night, I had a panic attack. My chest felt like it was being crushed. I couldn't breathe. My friend drove me to the emergency room. The doctor said it was stress and exhaustion and told me to rest. But how could I rest when everything was falling apart? When I got back to my friend's apartment, I sat on her couch and stared at my laptop. I had an email from a small acquisition firm that offered $800,000 for FarmSense. It was a fraction of what the company was worth, but it would be enough to pay back my team, settle debts, and walk away with a little dignity. I hovered my cursor over the reply button. Margot showed up at the apartment. My friend had called her. She sat next to me and looked at the email. Then she closed my laptop. "You've come too far to give them the satisfaction," she said. "Your family wants you to fail. Preston wants you to fail. Felix thought you were easy to rob because you'd give up, prove them all wrong." I looked at her. "I'm so tired," I said. "I know," she said. "But you're also stronger than you think. One more push, that's all you need." I closed my eyes. I thought about that photo of the hungry children in the barren field. I thought about the farmers who'd told me I'd saved their livelihoods. I thought about everything I'd survived already, and I decided she was right. One more push. We sued Felix. It took 6 months, but we won. The court ordered him to repay $150,000 of what he'd stolen, minus legal fees. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. The case made local news, and suddenly I was getting calls from journalists who wanted to hear my story. Woman founder fights back against embezzlement. The publicity was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it made people sympathetic to us. On the other, it exposed how vulnerable we'd been. But the sympathy outweighed the concerns. New investors reached out. People who said they admired my resilience. One of those people was Clayton, a seasoned entrepreneur who'd built and sold 3 companies. He was in his late 50s, calm and thoughtful in a way that reminded me of a good therapist. He took me to lunch and said, "I've read about what you've been through. I've been there. Different details, same story. People will test you, betray you, try to break you. The question is whether you let them." I told him I was trying not to. He offered me a $300,000 bridge loan at a reasonable interest rate, plus ongoing mentorship. I asked him why he'd take the risk. He said, "Because the best founders aren't the ones who never fall. They're the ones who get up every time. You keep getting up." With Clayton's loan and guidance, we stabilized. I brought financial oversight in-house and implemented systems to prevent another Felix situation. I also doubled down on product development. We launched FarmSense 2.0, which included blockchain-based supply chain tracking. Farmers could now trace their produce from seed to consumer, proving authenticity for organic and sustainable certifications. It was a feature that TerraGrow didn't have, and it resonated with our target market. We partnered with Whole Foods and Trader Joe's to integrate our traceability system into their supply chains. Revenue climbed back to previous levels and then beyond. Around this time, Forbes reached out. They were considering me for their 30 under 30 list in the agriculture category. I was 32, so I barely qualified. The recognition felt surreal. A photographer came to our office. They interviewed me about my journey. When the issue came out 2 months later, there I was. Harper Kimball, 32, founder of FarmSense AI. The article talked about my family background, though I was careful not to name names. It mentioned opposition I'd faced and obstacles I'd overcome. The quote they highlighted was, "Success isn't about proving people wrong, it's about proving yourself right." My father saw it. I know because he called me, not to congratulate me, to tell me I needed to decline the recognition. He said it would look bad for Natalie's reputation at the hospital if people started comparing us. He said I was overshadowing my sister and that showed a lack of respect. I was so stunned I almost laughed. "You want me to decline a major professional honor because it might make Natalie feel bad?" He said yes. He said family came first. He said if I really cared about them, I'd understand. I told him no. I told him Natalie's insecurity was not my problem. I told him I was done shrinking myself to make them comfortable. He said I'd regret this. Then he hung up. 2 weeks later, I started losing investor interest. 3 potential investors who'd been close to committing suddenly backed out. When I asked why, they were vague. Concerns about leadership, questions about long-term viability. It didn't make sense. Our numbers were solid. Our product was strong. Then Clayton did some digging. My father had been making calls, using his connections in the legal and business communities to quietly plant doubt about me, suggesting I was unstable, that I had poor judgment, that investing in my company was risky. It was subtle, plausibly deniable, but effective. I felt something inside me harden. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was active sabotage. My own father was using his professional network to destroy my business because I wouldn't obey him. Natalie and Preston escalated too. They hired a lawyer and sent me a cease and desist letter claiming I'd used family trade secrets in building FarmSense. It was absurd. There were no trade secrets. They were a doctor and a law student. They had nothing to do with agricultural technology, but the letter was designed to intimidate and create legal costs. I had to hire a lawyer to respond, which cost me $80,000 I didn't have. Then they went further. They hired a PR firm to plant negative articles about me. Opinion pieces questioning my ethics, social media posts asking whether I was a fraud, fake reviews on our website claiming our product didn't work. It was a coordinated attack designed to destroy my reputation. One of the hashtags they pushed was #Harper Kimball fraud. It trended for 2 days. Major clients paused their contracts pending investigation. Our revenue dropped 30% overnight. The final betrayal came from someone I never expected. Delilah was my best friend from Cornell. We'd stayed close through everything. She'd been one of the people who lent me money when I was desperate. She'd celebrated every victory with me. I told her everything because I trusted her completely. Then one of my employees found something strange. Documents from our internal strategy meetings were showing up in TerraGrow's marketing materials, specific phrases we'd used, ideas we'd discussed. It didn't make sense until I checked our server logs. Someone with Delilah's login credentials had accessed confidential files repeatedly over the past 6 months. I called her. I asked her directly if she'd been sharing information with anyone. She hesitated. Then she admitted it. Preston had reached out to her months ago. Had offered her $50,000 to consult on competitive intelligence. She said she didn't think she was doing anything wrong. She said she had student loans. She said it'd understand if I weren't so privileged. I was so angry I couldn't speak. I hung up and blocked her number. My best friend, someone I'd trusted with my dreams and fears, someone who'd seen me at my lowest. She'd sold me out for money from my brother, who was using the information to help my competitors. I sat alone in my office at 3 a.m. I'd lost count of how many times I'd been betrayed. By partners, by employees, by family, by friends. I felt completely isolated, like I couldn't trust anyone, like the world was full of people waiting to exploit any weakness. I thought about shutting down the company, not because it wasn't working, but because I was so tired of fighting, tired of being hurt, tired of discovering that people I loved were willing to destroy me. Then my phone dinged. An email. It was from a farmer in Nebraska named Earl. He said, "I just wanted to write and thank you. Your technology saved my farm. I was about to lose everything. Now I'm profitable again. My kids can go to college. You gave me hope. I don't know what you're going through, but I know people are talking about you online. I just want you to know that you changed my life. Thank you." I read that email 5 times. Then I scrolled through my inbox. There were dozens more like it. Farmers from all over the country telling me how FarmSense had helped them. Thanking me. Blessing me. Telling me to keep going. And I realized something. I'd been so focused on my family's approval, on my enemies' attacks, on the betrayals and the obstacles, that I'd lost sight of the mission. This was never about them. It was about the people I was helping, the farmers, the families, the future. And they were worth fighting for. I decided to stop playing defense and start playing offense. I hired one of the best defamation lawyers in New York and sued Natalie and Preston. We had evidence of their coordinated smear campaign, emails, payment records to the PR firm, social media analytics showing the artificial boosting of negative hashtags. My lawyer said we had a strong case. "This is harassment," he said. "And it's well documented. They'll either settle or face a very public trial." I told him to push forward. I also decided to lean into the mission more visibly. If my family wanted to paint me as unethical, it'd show the world exactly what I stood for. I launched FarmSense Foundation, a nonprofit arm that would provide free technology to struggling small farms. We started with 50 farms in Appalachia and the rural South. The story was picked up by CNN, then the New York Times, then the Washington Post. Young entrepreneur uses tech for good. It was the narrative I'd always wanted but had been too busy surviving to cultivate. The public response was overwhelming. Farmers started posting thank you videos on TikTok. FarmSense family started trending. Celebrities who cared about sustainability began mentioning us. Suddenly, we weren't just a tech company, we were a movement. The attacks from my family looked petty and cruel in contrast. Social media turned on them. People started digging into who was behind the smear campaign. Though I never confirmed it publicly, the internet figured it out. My family's reputations took a beating. We closed our Series A funding round. $8 million led by a top-tier venture capital firm. Our valuation hit $40 million. Clayton joined our board of directors. Margot came on as an official advisor with equity. We were growing faster than I'd ever imagined. We had 60 employees, offices in Brooklyn and San Francisco, partnerships with major retailers. We were profitable. For the first time, I could breathe. But my family wasn't done. My father and mother showed up at my office without warning. The receptionist called me, confused. "Your parents are here?" I almost told her to send them away. But I was curious. What could they possibly want now? I met them in the lobby. They looked older than I remembered. My father's hair was grayer. My mother's face was lined with tension. They said they needed to talk. I took them to a conference room and closed the door. My father started by saying they'd heard about the company's success. They said they were proud. They said family was family and it was time to put the past behind us. Then they got to the point. They wanted me to invest in Preston's new business venture. They wanted me to buy them a vacation home in Nantucket. They wanted me to fund Natalie's hospital wing donation so she could have her name on a building. They said it was only fair. After all, they'd raised me. They'd paid for my education. Or at least part of it. I owed them. I stared at them. The audacity was breathtaking. After years of calling me a disappointment, after sabotaging my business, after trying to destroy my reputation, they thought they could just show up and demand money. My father must have seen something in my face because he said, "Don't be selfish, Harper. Family helps family. This is your responsibility." My mother added, "We've sacrificed so much for you children. It's time you showed some gratitude." I stood up. I said, "You want to talk about family? Let's talk about it. For years, you called me a disappointment. You told me my dreams were worthless. When I asked for help, you turned your back. When I succeeded anyway, you tried to destroy me. Natalie invested in my competitors. Preston spread lies about me. You, Dad, used your network to sabotage my fundraising. And now you want my money?" My father's face turned red. He said, "We're your parents. You wouldn't exist without us. Everything you have, you owe to us." I said, "You're right. Without you, I wouldn't have had to fight so hard. I wouldn't have learned to stand on my own. I wouldn't have become who I am. So thank you for that. But I don't owe you $1. My mother started crying. She said I was ungrateful, that I was tearing the family apart, that I'd regret this someday. I said, "I'm not tearing anything apart. You did that years ago. I came to this meeting to hear what you'd say. To see if you'd apologize, if you'd acknowledge what you did. But you just want money. So here's what's going to happen. I'm not giving you anything. Not for houses, not for donations, not for Preston's ventures. But I will be giving money. To my employees who stuck with me. To farmers who need help. To my foundation. To causes that matter. You taught me what not to be, and for that lesson, I'm grateful. But we're done here." My father stood up. He said they'd contest my grandmother's will, that I wouldn't see a penny of inheritance. I said, "Go ahead. My lawyer will enjoy the billable hours." My mother looked at me like I was a stranger. She said, "You've changed. You're not the girl we raised." I said, "You're right. I'm better." Then I walked out. I left them sitting in that conference room. I went back to my office, closed the door, and sat in silence. My hands were shaking, but I felt lighter, like I'd finally cut a rope that had been dragging me underwater for years. 2 weeks later, my lawyer confirmed what I already knew. The inheritance was legally mine. My grandmother's will was ironclad. But I didn't want it. The money felt tainted. So I donated all $3 million to an organization that helped farming families affected by climate change. When my family found out, Preston called me screaming. He said I was insane, that I'd thrown away a fortune out of spite. I said, "It wasn't spite, it was peace." Then I blocked all their numbers. I was done. Finally, completely, done. 6 months after cutting ties with my family, something unexpected happened. A large agricultural conglomerate called Agricor Global reached out. They wanted to acquire FarmSense. Their offer was $8.5 million, plus a commitment to maintain and expand the FarmSense Foundation with an additional $2 million in funding. They wanted to integrate our technology into their global supply chain and scale it to farmers in developing countries. It was everything I'd dreamed of when I started. Impact at scale, my technology reaching people who needed it most. But I was torn. I'd built this company from nothing. I'd bled for it, cried over it, nearly lost everything for it. Could I really let it go? I talked to Margot. She said, "You've proven everything you set out to prove. You've built something valuable. You've helped thousands of farmers. You've created jobs. You've changed an industry. Maybe it's time to take the win and figure out what's next." I talked to Clayton. He said, "You're 32 years old. You have your whole life ahead of you. This exit gives you freedom. Freedom to start something new, freedom to rest, freedom to live. Think about what you really want, not what you think you should want." I thought about it for 2 weeks. I walked through Brooklyn at night, remembering the early days in my tiny apartment. I visited some of the farms that used our technology and talked to the farmers. They all said the same thing. "You've already changed our lives. Whatever you do next, we're grateful." I realized I was tired. Not just physically, though I was that too, but emotionally. I'd been fighting for so long, proving myself, defending myself, surviving attack after attack. I wanted to build again, but differently. I wanted to create without constantly looking over my shoulder, and this acquisition would let me do that. I negotiated hard. I got the price up to $8.5 million. I secured a board seat so I could have input on the foundation's direction. I made sure every employee got equity payouts and job offers. I protected the mission. Then I signed the papers. The money hit my account 3 days later, $8.5 million. I stared at the number on my phone screen and felt nothing. Not joy, exactly. Not relief. Just a quiet sense of completion. Margot and Clayton took me out to celebrate. My team threw a party at our office. There was champagne and laughter and speeches about how far we'd come. It was perfect, except my family wasn't there, and I realized I didn't care. The news went public. TechCrunch ran the story. Forbes did a follow-up. Local news covered it. And of course, my family saw it. Natalie called first. She left a voicemail saying, "I always knew you had it in you, Harper. I'm so proud of you. Let's get coffee." I deleted it without listening to the whole thing. Preston sent a text. "Congrats. No hard feelings, right?" I didn't respond. My mother sent a message. "We need to talk about your grandmother's estate." And then, later that day, "We're having a family dinner Sunday. Don't be late." My father sent nothing. But I knew that I'll be at that dinner, expecting me to show up like nothing had happened, expecting me to play nice now that I had money. Part of me wanted to ignore them, to just move on with my life and pretend they didn't exist, but another part of me needed closure. Real closure. Not just cutting contact, but saying my piece, making them hear me. So I decided to go. I told Clayton about my plan. He offered to come with me for support. I accepted. I needed someone there who knew the truth, who'd seen what I'd been through. The dinner was at an upscale restaurant in Connecticut, the kind of place my family loved. White tablecloths, sommeliers, menus without prices. I walked in wearing jeans and a blazer, Clayton beside me in a casual suit. My family was already seated. My father in his usual position at the head of the table. My mother to his right, perfectly composed. Natalie looking polished and cold. Preston scrolling on his phone. They all looked up when I arrived. My mother smiled. "Harper, darling, come sit. And who is this?" I introduced Clayton as my mentor. My father shook his hand, sizing him up. They ordered wine I didn't drink. They made small talk I didn't engage with. Then my father cleared his throat. "So," he said, "now that you've had your success, I think it's time we talk about the future, the family's future. Your mother and I have been thinking. We'd like to purchase a vacation home in Nantucket, somewhere the whole family can gather. We thought you might want to contribute." My mother nodded. "It would be a lovely investment, something we could all enjoy together." Natalie leaned forward. "And I've been working on a donation for the hospital, a new research wing. I thought it would be nice if both our names were on it, sisters supporting science together." Preston finally looked up from his phone. "I'm starting a new venture, sustainable investment fund. I could use a partner with capital. We'd make a good team." I looked at each of them. They were smiling. Like this was reasonable. Like the past 5 years hadn't happened. Like they hadn't tried to destroy me. I put down my water glass. I stood up. The table went quiet. I said, "Let me make sure I understand. You want me to buy you a house? Fund your donation? Invest in your business?" My father frowned. "We're family, Harper. This is what families do. They support each other. I laughed. It wasn't a nice laugh. I said, support each other. Let's talk about support. I started listing everything. How they'd called me a disappointment when I chose my own path. How they'd refused to help when I was struggling. How Natalie had invested in my competitor and stolen my ideas. How Preston had spread lies about me online and paid my best friend to spy on me. How my father had used his connections to sabotage my fundraising. How they'd filed frivolous lawsuits and hired PR firms to destroy my reputation. How they'd shown up only when I had money to take. My mother's face went pale. Natalie started to interrupt. I held up my hand. I'm not finished. I said, you taught me that blood doesn't make you family. Loyalty does. Respect does. Love does. And you've shown me none of those things. For years, I tried to earn your approval. I thought if I just worked hard enough, succeeded enough, proved myself enough, you'd finally see me. But I was wrong. You'll never see me, because you don't want to. You want a version of me that doesn't exist. Someone who fits your mold. Who makes you look good. Who obeys without question. That's not me. And I'm done apologizing for it. My father's face turned red. He said, how dare you speak to us this way? We gave you everything. You wouldn't be here without us. I said, you're right. I wouldn't. I'd probably be happier. But I am grateful. Because you taught me what not to be. You taught me that success means nothing without integrity, that money doesn't buy respect, that family is something you choose, not something you're born into. So thank you for those lessons. But this is where we part ways. Natalie said, you're tearing this family apart. I said, no, you did that, years ago. When you chose your egos over your daughter and sister. Preston stood up. He said, you'll regret this. You need us more than we need you. I said, I don't need you at all. That's what you've never understood. My mother started crying. She said, we're your parents. You can't just walk away. I said, watch me. I turned to leave. My father called after me. Well, contest the inheritance. Well, sue you. Well, make your life hell. I stopped. I looked back at him. I said, you already tried that. And I'm still standing. Do your worst. But do it without me. Then I walked out of that restaurant. Clayton followed. We got in my car and drove away. My hands were shaking again, but this time it was from adrenaline, not fear. I'd said everything I needed to say, and it meant every word. Over the next few weeks, I blocked all their numbers. I instructed my lawyer to handle all communication regarding my grandmother's estate. I made it clear I wanted no contact. Natalie tried reaching out through mutual acquaintances. I told them to stop passing messages. Preston left comments on my social media. I blocked him and made my accounts private. My parents sent a letter through their lawyer. Mine responded that any further harassment would result in a restraining order. Eventually, they stopped, and I felt nothing but relief. I donated the $3 million inheritance to an organization supporting farm families. When the donation was announced, Preston called my lawyer screaming that I'd wasted family money. My lawyer calmly explained that it was my money to do with as I pleased, and if Preston called again, we'd pursue legal action for harassment. He didn't call again. The media covered the donation. Harper Kimball gives away inheritance to support farmers. People called me generous. But it wasn't about generosity. It was about freedom. That money represented my family's last claim on me. Donating it was cutting the final thread. 6 months after the sale and the final break with my family, I moved to Colorado. I bought a small property outside Boulder, with a few acres of land. I started a garden. I woke up early to watch the sunrise over the mountains. I worked remotely as a board member for FarmSense, now integrated into Agricor Global's operations. The technology I'd built was being deployed in 12 countries, helping over 50,000 farmers. The foundation was thriving, providing free technology and training to struggling farms across America. But I wasn't grinding anymore. I wasn't fighting. I was living. I started therapy. Real therapy with a psychologist who specialized in family trauma. We talked about narcissistic family systems and scapegoating. We talked about betrayal and trust. We talked about the difference between forgiveness and closure. She told me I didn't have to forgive my family to move on. That sometimes, the healthiest thing you can do is walk away and build a new life. Permission I didn't know I needed. She also helped me see patterns I'd carried. The way I'd overworked to prove my worth. The way I'd accepted betrayal as normal because it was what I'd grown up with. the way Eid confused approval with love. Slowly, I started to untangle those knots. I built a chosen family. Margot visited often. We hiked and cooked and talked about the future. Clayton became like a father figure, calling every week to check in and offering wisdom without judgment. I reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with during the startup years. I made new friends in Colorado, people who knew nothing about my past and liked me just for who I was. I started dating again. I met Jasper, an environmental scientist working on soil carbon sequestration. He was kind and thoughtful, and had no interest in tech startups or family drama. He liked hiking and cooking and reading by the fire. We took things slow. I told him about my family eventually. He listened without judgment and said, "You're incredible. Don't let anyone make you doubt that." It was the first healthy relationship I'd ever had. My mornings became sacred. I'd wake up, make coffee, and sit on the porch watching the light change over the mountains. I'd tend my garden, working the soil with my hands like I'd dreamed of doing when I first decided to study agriculture. I volunteered teaching AgTech at the local community college. I mentored young entrepreneurs, especially women who reminded me of my younger self. I told them to protect themselves, to trust carefully, to build for impact, not approval. I gave them the advice I wish someone had given me. Forbes reached out for a follow-up article. "Where is Harper Kimball now?" I agreed to an interview. The journalist asked about the sale, about my family, about what came next. I was honest in a way I hadn't been before. I talked openly about family estrangement, about choosing yourself when people demand you shrink, about how success isn't measured by money or approval, but by impact and inner peace. The article resonated. Within days, it had been shared over 100,000 times. My inbox filled with messages from people who'd been estranged from their families, who'd been called disappointments, who'd survived betrayal and rebuilt. They said my story gave them permission to stop fighting for people who'd never see them, to walk away and build something better. I checked in on my family occasionally, not because I wanted contact, but because information is power. Natalie's hospital donation had fallen through when her business partner was caught embezzling funds. The scandal tarnished her reputation. She'd been quietly demoted. Preston's business venture had failed within a year. He'd burned through his investors' money, and was now working for my father's firm in a junior position. My father and mother had retired quietly. Their reputations in Connecticut social circles had taken a hit once people realized they'd sabotaged their own daughter. I felt nothing when I learned these things. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just a distant acknowledgement that karma, or consequence, or whatever you want to call it, had found them. I found a letter one day while sorting through old papers. It had been attached to my grandmother's will, addressed to me personally. I'd never opened it. I wasn't ready before, but now I was. I sat on my porch with my coffee and opened the envelope. My grandmother's handwriting was shaky but clear. "Harper," she wrote, "I always saw your fire. Your parents feared it because it reminded them of their own limitations. Don't let them dim it. Build something that matters. Love the people who love you back. And remember that family is what you make it, not what you're born into. I'm proud of you. Always have been. Always will be. Love, Grandma." I cried reading that letter. Not sad tears, but relieved ones. Someone in my family had seen me, had believed in me, had understood. She'd been gone for 3 years, but her words reached across time and gave me what I'd been searching for my whole life. Validation from someone who shared my blood and actually cared. I framed that letter and hung it in my study. On days when I doubted myself, I'd read it and remember. The Farm Sense Foundation's impact continued to grow. WED helped 5,000 small farms stay solvent during tough economic times. WED created a scholarship program that sent 200 kids from farming families to agricultural colleges. My legacy wasn't the $8.5 million. It wasn't the Forbes recognition or the TED Talk or the company sale. It was the lives changed. The families fed. The farmers who could pass their land down to their children because our technology had made them profitable. That was what mattered. One morning, sitting on my porch watching the sunrise, I thought about my younger self, the girl who'd been called a disappointment at that family dinner, the girl who'd cried in her car and then decided to build something anyway. I thought about everything she'd survived, everything she'd lost, everything she'd gained, and I realized something. I had disappointed them. It disappointed their expectations, their narrow vision of what success looked like, their need for control and conformity. It disappointed their image of who I should be. And I'd never been more proud of disappointing anyone, because in disappointing them, I'd found myself. I'd built something meaningful. I'd helped people. I'd learned what real strength was, not never falling, but getting up every single time, not never being betrayed, but learning to trust again anyway, not seeking approval, but approving of yourself. My family had wanted me to fail, so they could say I told you so. Instead, I'd succeeded beyond their comprehension, but more importantly, I'd defined success on my own terms, not by their metrics of prestige and appearances, but by impact and integrity and peace. I didn't disappoint the farmers whose livelihoods I'd saved. I didn't disappoint the kids who'd eat because of sustainable farming practices. I didn't disappoint the entrepreneurs I mentored who went on to build their own companies. I didn't disappoint the people who read my story and found courage to chase their own dreams despite family opposition. And most importantly, I didn't disappoint myself. I'd promised myself I'd build something that mattered. I'd promised I'd stand up every time I was knocked down. I'd promised I'd choose purpose over approval. And I'd kept every one of those promises. In the end, that was the only person I'd needed to prove anything to. Myself, not my parents, not my siblings, not investors or journalists or anyone else. Just the girl who'd sat crying in her car 5 years ago, wondering if she was crazy to believe in her dream. I'd proven to her that she wasn't crazy, that she was brave, that she was capable, that she was enough. And that was everything. My phone buzzed. An email from a young woman named Clara in rural Texas. She wrote, "Dear Miss Kimball, I'm a first-generation college student studying AgTech because of you. My parents think it's foolish. They want me to study something practical. They call my dreams unrealistic. But I watched your TED Talk and read your Forbes interview. You showed me it's possible. Can you give me advice?" I smiled. I opened a reply and started typing. "First, let me tell you a story. About a girl who was called a disappointment, about how she turned that disappointment into a purpose, about how the people who doubt you loudest are often the ones most afraid of your success, about how you don't need their permission to be extraordinary." And I kept writing, passing forward the hard-won wisdom of someone who'd walked this path before her. The sun rose higher over the mountains. The garden needed watering. Jasper was coming over for breakfast. I had a mentoring call scheduled for the afternoon. My life was simple now. Quiet, full of small joys instead of constant battles. And I'd never been happier. Because I'd learned the most important lesson of all. Your family can't make you a disappointment. Only you can decide if you've disappointed yourself. And I hadn't, not even close. So if you're out there watching this, fighting for a dream that your family doesn't believe in, know this. You're not alone. The path is hard. People will betray you. People who should love you might try to tear you down instead. But if you keep getting up, if you stay true to your purpose, if you build something that matters more than their approval, you'll find something better than their validation. You'll find yourself, and that's worth everything. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been called a disappointment by your family? Have you had to choose between their approval and your dreams? Drop your story in the comments. Let's build a community of people who chose themselves. And if this story resonated with you, hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future stories. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's fighting for a dream despite opposition. Your support means everything, and together, we can create a space where disappointments become destinations. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And remember, the only approval you truly need is your own. Keep building, keep rising, keep proving them wrong by proving yourself right. I'll see you in the next one.